My name is Amanda Richardson, and 6 months ago, I discovered that my younger sister Jessica had been using the money I loaned her to seduce my husband and destroy my marriage. What they did not know was that I had been planning this exact scenario for over a year. And every dollar Jessica spent was carefully calculated to expose both of their true characters. By the time they realized what I had done, they were begging me for forgiveness, but it was far too late. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are viewing from. Before I tell you about how I turned my family's betrayal into the most satisfying revenge of my life, hit like and subscribe for more real stories about marriage, family, loyalty, and what happens when you underestimate the woman who raised you. But what they did not know was that I was worth $5.5 million from a family inheritance that I had kept secret from everyone, including my husband. And every loan I gave Jessica, every manipulative request I granted, was part of a larger plan to expose their true characters while protecting my real wealth from their greed. Let me start from the very beginning, because understanding how Jessica and Michael ended up betraying me requires knowing the complicated history of our family and the money that changed everything. I am 34 years old, working as a senior accountant for a mid-sized construction company in Spokane, Washington, where I deliberately maintain the appearance of earning a modest $78,000 per year. But the reality is that I have been financially independent since I was 25, thanks to an inheritance that no one in my family knows about. The inheritance came from my great-aunt Eleanor, my grandmother's sister, who had lived quietly in Portland her entire life. Aunt Eleanor never married, never had children, and spent 40 years working as a bookkeeper for various small businesses. Everyone in our family, including my grandparents and parents, assumed that Eleanor lived modestly because she had modest means. We visited her once or twice a year for family gatherings, and she always seemed frugal and careful with money. What we did not know was that Eleanor had been investing steadily for decades, putting almost every spare dollar into stocks, bonds, and real estate properties. She lived in the same small house her entire adult life, drove used cars until they fell apart, and rarely spent money on anything that was not absolutely necessary. But she was building wealth systematically and secretly. When Eleanor died suddenly of a stroke at age 78, her will shocked everyone in our extended family. She had accumulated assets worth $5.7 million, including rental properties, investment accounts, and a small business that she had purchased and operated successfully for 15 years. Even more shocking was her decision to leave the entire estate to me, bypassing her siblings, my parents. And Jessica completely Eleanor's will included a letter explaining her reasoning, which I have kept private all these years. She had watched our family dynamics carefully during those holiday visits, and she had concluded that I was the only family member who demonstrated both financial responsibility and genuine kindness without expecting anything in return. She had noticed that I worked hard, saved money, and helped family members without keeping score or demanding recognition. More importantly, Eleanor had observed that Jessica had always been manipulative and demanding with family members, expecting others to solve her problems while taking no responsibility for the consequences of her poor decisions. Eleanor wrote that she feared Jessica would waste any inheritance within a few years, while I would use the money wisely and perhaps help others who deserved assistance. The inheritance process took nearly a year to complete, with lawyers, accountants, and investment advisors helping me understand and manage the complex portfolio Eleanor had built. By the time everything was settled, I was 25 years old and worth $5.4 million, with assets that were generating approximately $200,000 per year in passive income. But I made a decision that would prove crucial years later. I decided to keep the inheritance completely secret from my family, my friends, and eventually my husband. I continued working at my regular job, living in a modest apartment, and maintaining the lifestyle of someone earning a middle-class salary. The investment income was reinvested automatically, and the principal continued to grow without anyone knowing about my true financial situation. There, were several reasons for my secrecy. First, I had watched how Jessica behaved around money and family members who had resources, always asking for loans and favors while never taking responsibility for repaying or reciprocating. I knew that if Jessica learned about my wealth, she would view me as a solution to all her financial problems rather than working to solve them herself. Second, I wanted to find a husband who loved me for myself rather than my money. I had seen too many relationships where wealth became a source of conflict, manipulation, or false attraction. By keeping my inheritance secret, I could ensure that any man who married me was genuinely interested in me as a person rather than as a financial opportunity. Third, I wanted to test the character of people around me by seeing how they treated me when they believed I had limited resources. Eleanor's letter had emphasized the importance of understanding people's true motivations, and maintaining the appearance of modest means was the perfect way to observe how family members and friends behaved. When they thought I could not provide significant financial benefits, the strategy worked exactly as I had hoped, though not in ways I had expected. Over the years, I learned a great deal about my family members, my friends, and eventually my husband by observing how they treated someone they believed to be financially limited. Some people remained kind and supportive regardless of my apparent economic status, while others showed their true colors by treating me differently than they treated people they perceived as wealthy or powerful. Jessica fell into the second category almost immediately after I started working and living independently. She had always been the family favorite, charming and pretty and skilled at getting adults to rescue her from various self-created problems. But as we both entered our 20s, Jessica began treating me as a resource rather than a sister, calling when she needed money or help but rarely maintaining contact during periods when her life was stable. The pattern became more pronounced after Jessica learned that I had a steady job and was living responsibly. She started calling more frequently with various financial emergencies, always with detailed explanations about why she needed help and promises to repay money once she got back on her feet. What Jessica did not know was that I could have easily given her $10,000 without affecting my budget. But I deliberately kept my assistance modest to see how she would behave. What I discovered was that Jessica's gratitude and affection were directly related to my usefulness to her. When I provided money or help, she was sweet, appreciative, and full of promises about how much our family relationship meant to her. When I occasionally said no to her requests, she would become cold, critical, and distant until her next crisis required my assistance again. This pattern continued for several years while I finished college, started my career, and began looking for a serious romantic relationship. I dated various men during this period, always being careful not to reveal my true financial situation until I was confident about their character and motivations. Several relationships ended when I realized that men were more interested in what I might provide for them than in who I was as a person. I met Michael Key Richardson when I was 28 at a company party for the construction firm where I worked. Michael was 30, charming, and worked as a sales manager at a car dealership downtown. He seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts, my career goals, and my personality rather than focusing on material concerns or asking detailed questions about my financial situation. Our courtship developed slowly over several months, with Michael consistently demonstrating thoughtfulness, reliability, and respect for my independence. He paid for dates without making me feel obligated. He listened to my concerns about work and family without trying to fix everything. And he seemed to enjoy my company without expecting anything beyond our time together. When Michael proposed after 18 months of dating, I felt confident that his feelings for me were genuine, rather than based on what I could provide for him financially. We had discussed marriage, careers, and future goals extensively, and Michael had never shown any signs of being particularly interested in money or material possessions beyond what was reasonable. For someone in his profession, we were married in a modest ceremony that cost approximately $8,000. which we split evenly despite my ability to pay for the entire wedding without affecting my budget. Michael insisted on contributing equally to all our shared expenses, including the down payment on our house, monthly bills, and vacation costs. His insistence on financial partnership rather than dependence seemed to confirm that he had married me for love rather than economic benefit. 4. The first 3 years of our marriage, I continued maintaining my secret about the inheritance while observing Michael's character and behavior in various situations. He remained consistently kind, hardworking, and respectful, never asking intrusive questions about my family background or showing unusual interest in my financial accounts. I began to think that I had finally found someone who loved me unconditionally. But during our 4th year of marriage, I began noticing subtle changes in Michael's behavior that made me slightly uncomfortable. Though I could not identify specific reasons for my uneasiness, he started working later hours more frequently, claiming that car sales required more evening availability during certain seasons. He became more interested in my work schedule and my family relationships, asking questions that seemed casual but felt somehow calculated. Most concerning was Michael's growing encouragement of my financial assistance to Jessica, whose problems had been escalating in both frequency and severity since she moved to Spokane 2 years earlier. Jessica had always been irresponsible with money, but her financial crises were becoming more dramatic and expensive, requiring larger loans that were never repaid according to our agreements. Initially, I interpreted Michael's encouragement as evidence of his generous spirit and his understanding of family loyalty. When Jessica would call, crying about rent, money, or car repairs, Michael would often suggest that I should help her more than I was planning to, arguing that family was more important than money and that I could afford to be more generous with my stable income. But over time, I began to notice that Michael's advice about Jessica always involved me giving her more money, never suggesting that she should take more responsibility for her financial management or seek professional help for her chronic problems. His encouragement seemed designed to maximize my financial assistance to Jessica, rather than to help her develop independence. The situation became more complicated when Jessica moved to Spokane from Seattle 18 months ago, claiming that she needed a fresh start and wanted to be closer to family for emotional support. She found a small apartment across town and a job as a receptionist at a dental office, which seemed promising initially, but within months, Jessica was calling regularly about various financial emergencies that required my assistance. Her car needed expensive repairs, her apartment rent had increased beyond her budget, she had unexpected medical expenses, or she faced other urgent financial problems that she could not handle on her modest receptionist salary. Over the course of a year, I had provided Jessica with approximately $25,000 in loans ranging from $500 to $3,000 per incident. From Jessica's perspective, this represented generous help from a sister who could barely afford such assistance on her accounting salary. From my actual financial perspective, $25,000 was less than what my investments earned in 2 months. But I was not giving Jessica money out of inability to say no or lack of financial boundaries. I was conducting a careful test of both Jessica's character and Michael's motivations by observing how they behaved. When they believed I was making significant financial sacrifices to help family members, every loan was documented, every promise of repayment was recorded, and every explanation Jessica provided was carefully evaluated for truthfulness. What I discovered through this process was deeply disappointing, but not entirely surprising. Jessica was consistently lying about her financial emergencies, using money I provided for purposes other than what she claimed, and showing no genuine intention of repaying loans or improving her financial management skills. She was treating me as a personal bank account rather than a sister who was supposedly struggling to provide assistance. Michael's behavior was equally revealing. Instead of encouraging Jessica to be more responsible or suggesting that my generosity had limits, he consistently pushed me to provide even more financial assistance. He would make comments about how family loyalty was more important than strict financial planning, or how my stable income meant I could afford to help Jessica more than I was already doing. The breakthrough in my understanding came 4 months ago, when I discovered text messages between Michael and Jessica that revealed they had been coordinating their approaches to requesting money from me. I had borrowed Michael's phone to call for takeout delivery while mine was charging, and a text notification from Jessica appeared on his screen. The message read, "Did you convince her to help with the apartment deposit? I need the money by Friday," and she seemed reluctant when I called. Yesterday, I scrolled through their previous conversations and found months of coordination between Jessica and Michael about the best timing and methods for requesting money from me. They discussed my work schedule, my mood patterns, and the most effective emotional appeals to ensure I would agree to provide financial assistance without asking too many detailed questions. Even more shocking was evidence of a romantic relationship that had been developing alongside their financial conspiracy. Michael wrote about looking forward to spending time alone with Jessica when I was working late, and Jessica responded with messages about her growing feelings for him and their plans for a future together. The text conversations revealed that Jessica's financial emergencies were often exaggerated or completely fabricated to create opportunities for requesting money that she then used for personal luxuries, entertainment, and gifts for Michael. Her apartment deposit story was false. She was actually planning to use my money for a romantic weekend getaway with my husband. Reading these messages, I felt a combination of betrayal and satisfaction. I was hurt by their deception, but I was also pleased that my testing strategy had worked perfectly. By pretending to have limited financial resources while carefully documenting their behavior, I had gathered comprehensive evidence of their manipulation and conspiracy while protecting the vast majority of my wealth from their exploitation. But instead of confronting them immediately, I decided to expand my testing to see exactly how far Jessica and Michael would go with their deception. I wanted to understand the full scope of their plans and gather even more evidence of their betrayal before revealing what I knew about their conspiracy. I also realized that this was the perfect opportunity to test whether their interest in me was purely financial. If Jessica and Michael were primarily motivated by greed, they would continue escalating their requests for money until they believed they had extracted everything I could provide. If Michael had any genuine feelings for me, he might show some reluctance to continue exploiting what he believed were my limited resources. The first expanded test came when Jessica called asking for $5,000 to pay for what she described as a business opportunity that would allow her to start a dental office management consulting company. She claimed that a former supervisor had offered to help her establish the business, but that she needed startup capital for licensing equipment and marketing. This request was significant because it represented the largest amount Jessica had ever asked for, and it came with an elaborate story about career advancement that would supposedly make her financially independent. Michael was extremely enthusiastic about this business loan, arguing that $5,000 was a small investment in Jessica's future financial stability. I agreed to provide the business loan while secretly monitoring how Jessica actually used the money. Within 2 weeks, it was obvious that her business opportunity was completely fictional. Instead of researching the consulting industry or developing business plans, Jessica had used my money to pay for expensive dinners with Michael, luxury shopping trips, and a weekend vacation to Seattle that she claimed was for business training. The second test involved asking Jessica to provide documentation and progress reports on her supposed consulting business. When I requested to see business registration papers, client contracts, or marketing materials, Jessica became evasive and defensive. She claimed that her business mentor preferred to keep things informal initially, and that too much documentation might interfere with the organic development of her client relationships. Jessica's inability to provide any evidence of legitimate business activities confirmed that her story was entirely fabricated. She was using my supposed business investment to fund her lifestyle and her relationship with Michael, while having no intention of starting any kind of consulting company. The third test came When I offered to invest additional money in Jessica's business if she could demonstrate that her initial efforts were producing results, I told Jessica that I was impressed with her entrepreneurial initiative and that I would consider providing another $10,000 if she could show me client contracts or revenue projections. Jessica's response to this offer was immediate panic, rather than gratitude or excitement. Instead of providing business documentation, she began making excuses about why additional investment might not be appropriate at this stage of her business development. She claimed that too much startup capital could actually harm a consulting business by making it appear too commercial rather than relationship-based. What Jessica did not realize was that her panic about additional investment revealed that she had no legitimate business activities to document. If her consulting company had been real, she would have been eager to accept more money and excited about the opportunity to expand her operations. Her reluctance to take additional money proved that she could not sustain her deception if I became more involved in monitoring her supposed business activities. The fourth test involved Michael's response to Jessica's business success. I began praising Jessica's entrepreneurial spirit and suggesting that Michael and I should consider starting our own side business to supplement our incomes. If Michael genuinely believed that Jessica was building a successful consulting company, he should have been interested in learning from her experience or exploring similar opportunities for us. Instead, Michael showed no interest in entrepreneurship or business development when it involved our money rather than mine alone. He claimed that his car sales career required too much focus for him to consider additional business activities, and that I should concentrate on helping Jessica succeed rather than starting competing ventures. Michael's lack of interest in business opportunities for us, combined with his enthusiasm for Jessica's supposed consulting company, revealed that he was primarily interested in directing my money toward Jessica rather than building wealth for our marriage. His motivations were clearly related to his relationship with Jessica rather than concern for our financial future. The fifth and most revealing test came when I mentioned that my company was considering promoting me to a senior management position. That would increase my salary significantly. I told Michael and Jessica that the promotion could mean an additional $20,000 per year in income, which would make it easier for me to help Jessica expand her consulting business. Both Michael and Jessica became extremely interested in the timeline and details of my potential promotion. They asked specific questions about when the additional income would begin, how much additional money I would have available for investment and assistance, and whether I would receive any signing bonuses or other immediate financial benefits. Their intense focus on my potential salary increase revealed that they were calculating how much additional money they could extract from me if my income increased. They were not interested in my career advancement or professional success except as it related to their ability to obtain more money from me. But what they did not know was that my potential promotion story was entirely fictional. I had created this test specifically to see how they would react to the prospect of me having access to additional resources. Their greedy enthusiasm confirmed that their interest in my financial situation was purely exploitative. The sixth test involved offering to co-sign a loan for Jessica to purchase a car, which would have required me to provide detailed financial information to the lending institution. If Jessica genuinely needed transportation for her consulting business, she should have been eager to accept this assistance. If Michael genuinely wanted to help Jessica succeed, he should have encouraged this practical form of support instead. Both Jessica and Michael discouraged me from co-signing a loan, claiming that it would create unnecessary complications and potential liability for me if Jessica's business income was irregular. They preferred that I continue providing direct cash assistance rather than helping Jessica establish credit or formal financial relationships. That would require documentation and accountability. Their preference for cash over legitimate financial assistance revealed that they wanted to maintain the informal, undocumented nature of their exploitation. Co-signing a loan would have required Jessica to provide proof of income and business activities, which she could not do because her consulting company did not exist. The seventh test was the most comprehensive and conclusive. I told Jessica and Michael that I had been tracking my expenses and realized that I had provided Jessica with over $30,000 in assistance over the past 18 months. I suggested that we should formalize our financial arrangement with a written agreement that documented the loans and established a repayment. Scheduled up, both Jessica and Michael reacted with alarm and resistance to this suggestion. They claimed that family relationships should not be reduced to legal documents, and that formal loan agreements would create unnecessary tension and complexity in our personal relationships. Jessica became emotional and defensive, claiming that I was treating her like a stranger rather than a sister by suggesting legal documentation. Michael supported her position, arguing that trust and family loyalty were more important than contracts and paperwork. Their strong opposition to documenting our financial arrangement confirmed that they had no intention of repaying money they had obtained from me. If Jessica's financial difficulties were genuine and temporary, she should have welcomed a formal agreement that protected both of us and demonstrated her commitment to repayment. If Michael genuinely wanted to help Jessica become financially responsible, he should have supported accountability measures that would encourage her to take the loan seriously. By this point, I had comprehensive evidence that Jessica and Michael were conspiring to exploit my apparent financial resources through systematic deception and manipulation. They had consistently lied about Jessica's needs, coordinated their approaches to requesting money, developed a romantic relationship behind my back, and demonstrated that their interest in me was purely financial rather than personal. But I wanted to give them one final opportunity to reveal the ultimate scope of their greed and betrayal. I decided to offer Jessica the largest loan I had ever provided, an amount that would represent a genuine financial sacrifice for someone with my supposed income level, to see if they had any limits on their willingness to exploit my generosity. I told Jessica that I had been so impressed with her business success and her efforts to become financially independent that I wanted to make a major investment in her future. I offered to loan her $15,000 to expand her consulting company, hire employees, and lease office space for her growing client base. This offer represented what would be nearly 20% of my supposed annual income, an amount that would require me to make significant personal sacrifices and potentially jeopardize my own financial security. If Jessica had any genuine concern for my well-being, she should have declined such a large loan or expressed serious concern about my ability to afford such assistance. Instead, Jessica immediately accepted the $15,000 loan with enthusiasm and gratitude, showing no concern about the impact on my finances or the risks I would be taking to provide such a large amount of money. She claimed that this investment would be exactly what her business needed to become profitable, enough for her to repay all previous loans and achieve permanent financial independence. Michael was equally supportive of this major loan, arguing that it represented the best possible investment in Jessica's future and our family's financial stability. He encouraged me to view the $15,000 as a long-term investment rather than a loan. Since Jessica's business success would benefit everyone, their willingness to accept such a large loan confirmed that they had no genuine concern for my financial well-being or any intention of limiting their exploitation of my resources. They were prepared to take whatever I was willing to provide, regardless of the potential consequences for my own financial security. But they had also given me the perfect opportunity to document their conspiracy and implement the most satisfying revenge possible. I provided the $15,000 loan, while secretly preparing to expose their betrayal in the most public and humiliating way I could arrange. I spent the next month gathering additional evidence of how Jessica and Michael used the money I had provided them. Through careful observation, social media monitoring, and some strategic questions, I documented that Jessica was spending my loan money on luxury purchases, expensive restaurants, hotels for romantic getaways with Michael, and other personal expenses that had nothing to do with business development. I also discovered that Jessica and Michael had been discussing their long-term plans for continuing to extract money from me while building their romantic relationship. They had calculated how much money they could reasonably request without making me suspicious, and they were timing their approaches to coincide with my pay periods and bonuses to maximize their success. Most damaging was their discussion of what they called their exit strategy. Michael planned to file for divorce once they had accumulated enough money to start their new life together. And Jessica planned to move away from Spokane to avoid having to repay her loans or maintain our family relationship. They were essentially using my money to fund their conspiracy to abandon me with nothing but debt and betrayal. Armed with comprehensive evidence of their deception, I began planning their exposure and the consequences they would face for their betrayal. But I wanted their humiliation to be as public as possible, and I wanted to ensure that they would understand the full extent of what they had attempted to steal from me. I arranged a family dinner party at our house on a Sunday afternoon in November, inviting not just Jessica and Michael, but also both sets of our parents, several close family friends, and some of Michael's colleagues from the car dealership. I told everyone that I wanted to celebrate Jessica's business success and make some important announcements about our families. Future Jessica arrived wearing expensive new clothes and jewelry that she had purchased with money from her latest loan, apparently confident that her deception had been successful and that she was about to be praised for her supposed entrepreneurial achievements. Michael was equally relaxed and charming, playing the role of the supportive brother-in-law who had encouraged my investment in Jessica's business. As our guests enjoyed appetizers and drinks, Jessica entertained them with stories about her consulting company, her growing client base, and her plans for expansion. Michael added supportive comments about Jessica's work ethic and business acumen, presenting himself as someone who had recognized her potential early and encouraged my investment in her success. When dinner was served and everyone was comfortably seated around our dining room table, I stood up and asked for everyone's attention. I explained that I had several important announcements to make about our family's recent activities and future plans, and that I wanted to share this information with the people who cared most about Jessica, Michael, and me. I began by thanking everyone for their support of Jessica during her transition to entrepreneurship, and for their encouragement of my decision to invest in her business development. I explained that their enthusiasm had made it easier for me to provide financial assistance even when the amounts became substantial. Then, I pulled out a folder containing bank statements, receipts, text message printouts, and photographs that told the complete story of Jessica and Michael's conspiracy. As I began reading selected excerpts aloud, the dinner conversation around the table gradually stopped as our guests realized that something dramatic was unfolding. I read text messages between Jessica and Michael discussing their coordination of loan requests and their romantic relationship. I displayed receipts from restaurants, shopping trips, and hotel stays that showed how Jessica had actually spent money she claimed to need for business purposes. I shared photographs from their romantic getaways that contradicted their explanations about business training and professional development. The reaction from our dinner guests was immediate and devastating. My parents sat in stunned silence as they understood the extent of Jessica's lies and manipulation. Michael's parents looked mortified as they realized their son had been conducting an affair while married to me. Our friends appeared shocked and uncomfortable as they recognized that they had been deceived along with me. But the most satisfying moment came when I revealed the true extent of my financial situation and what Jessica and Michael had actually been trying to steal from me. I explained that I was worth $5.5 million from a family inheritance, and that every loan I had provided was part of a test to expose their character and motivations. The room went completely silent as everyone absorbed this revelation. Jessica's face went white as she realized that instead of successfully manipulating someone with limited resources, she had been exposed as a fraud by someone who could have easily provided everything she had asked for without any financial impact. Michael looked equally shocked as he understood that he had been conducting an affair and planning to divorce someone who could have supported him comfortably for the rest of his life, all for the sake of a conspiracy with someone who had been lying to both of them about her intentions. And Characteri continued by explaining that I had deliberately maintained the appearance of modest means to test the character of people around me, and that Jessica and Michael had failed this test completely by demonstrating that their interest in me was purely financial and exploitative. I concluded my presentation by announcing that both Jessica and Michael would be receiving legal demands for immediate repayment of all money obtained through false pretenses, plus interest and penalties for fraud. I also announced that divorce proceedings had already been filed, that Jessica was permanently banned from our family's financial support, and that their conspiracy had been documented for potential criminal prosecution. As I finished speaking, the dining room remained silent except for the sound of Jessica crying and Michael's attempts to deny and minimize their actions. The contrast between their confident arrival and their current humiliation was exactly the outcome I had been planning for months. The dinner ended with most of our guests leaving quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the dramatic revelations and unwilling to be associated with Jessica and Michael's fraudulent behavior. Jessica and Michael remained at the table, apparently too shocked to move, while I began cleaning up and preparing to close this chapter of my life permanently. Outside our house, Jessica made one desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Amanda," she said through her tears, "I never meant for things to go this far. I was just trying to get my life together, and Michael was helping me figure out how to ask for assistance. We never planned to hurt you or take advantage of your generosity. You stole over $40,000 from me through systematic lies and manipulation," I replied calmly. "You used my money to fund your affair with my husband while planning to disappear once you had extracted everything you thought I could provide. This was not a mistake or a misunderstanding, Jessica. This was a criminal conspiracy." Michael stepped forward, apparently hoping to control the damage to his situation. "Amanda," he said, "you have to understand that relationships are complicated and feelings can develop unexpectedly. Jessica and I never intended to deceive you or harm your finances. We can work this out through counseling and honest communication about everyone's needs and feelings. You coordinated your deception for over a year," I told him. "You encouraged me to provide money to your lover while knowing she was lying about how it would be used. You planned to divorce me once you had stolen what you believed was my life savings. This was not an emotional complication, Michael. This was calculated theft and betrayal." The next morning, both Jessica and Michael received certified letters from my attorney demanding full restitution within 30 days, plus interest and penalties that brought the total amount to nearly $60,000. The letters also informed them that failure to comply would result in civil lawsuits and criminal charges for fraud and conspiracy. Michael moved out of our house immediately, taking only his personal belongings and leaving behind everything we had purchased together during our marriage. His initial threats to contest the divorce and claim half our assets evaporated when his attorney explained that his documented affair and fraud eliminated any possibility of receiving favorable settlement terms. Jessica attempted to negotiate reduced repayment terms, claiming financial hardship and inability to afford immediate full restitution. I rejected all such proposals, explaining that her systematic fraud had forfeited any consideration for flexible payment arrangements. She would pay the full amount with penalties, or face criminal prosecution and civil lawsuits that would result in even greater financial consequences. The legal proceedings moved quickly, with both Jessica and Michael ultimately agreeing to complete restitution rather than face criminal charges and civil lawsuits that could have resulted in prison time and even larger financial judgments against them. Michael's divorce settlement required him to liquidate his assets and take on additional debt to meet his repayment obligations, while receiving nothing from our marriage except responsibility for his own debts. Jessica's repayment proved more difficult to enforce given her limited income and unstable employment history. But the legal pressure and social embarrassment From her exposure motivated her to find steadier work and seek assistance from our parents to expedite her restitution payments. The most satisfying consequence of their betrayal was that their romantic relationship did not survive the stress and humiliation of being exposed. Within 2 months of our dramatic dinner confrontation, Jessica and Michael were no longer speaking to each other, each blaming the other for the failure of their scheme and the legal and financial consequences they both faced. Jessica moved back to Seattle within 3 months, unable to cope with the social embarrassment and professional consequences of her exposure in Spokane's business community. Her reputation for deception and manipulation made it difficult for her to find steady employment or develop new relationships with people who might provide the financial assistance she had always relied upon. Michael continued working at the car dealership, but his colleagues and supervisors had learned about his affair and financial fraud through the community gossip that followed our dinner party. His professional reputation was severely damaged, and his prospects for advancement or moving to better positions were limited by public knowledge of his character defects. 1 year after exposing their conspiracy, both Jessica and Michael had completed their restitution payments. Though the financial and social consequences continued to affect their lives significantly. More importantly, I had learned valuable lessons about testing people's character and protecting myself from exploitation while building relationships with people who demonstrated genuine integrity. I began dating a financial planner who had helped me restructure my investment portfolio after the divorce. David knew about my inheritance from the beginning of our relationship, but his interest in me was clearly personal rather than financial. He had his own successful practice and independent wealth, and our relationship developed based on compatibility and shared values. Rather than financial considerations, David's response to learning about my experience with Jessica and Michael was supportive rather than judgmental. He understood why I had kept my inheritance secret, and he respected my decision to test people's character before trusting them with knowledge about my financial situation. Today, 2 years after exposing their betrayal, I'm engaged to David and planning a wedding that will celebrate genuine partnership based on honesty and mutual respect. Our financial planning is completely transparent. Our communication is direct and trustworthy, and our commitment is based on proven compatibility rather than romantic fantasy or financial attraction. The experience with Jessica and Michael was painful and expensive in emotional terms, but it ultimately led to better relationships and stronger personal boundaries that have protected me from similar exploitation. Their betrayal forced me to develop clearer standards for trustworthiness and more effective methods for evaluating people's motivations. Looking back, I realized that maintaining my inheritance secret while testing people's character was the best investment strategy I ever implemented. The money I lost to Jessica and Michael's conspiracy was insignificant compared to my total wealth, but the knowledge I gained about human nature and relationship dynamics has been invaluable. The systematic way I documented their deception and planned their exposure was not primarily about revenge, though their humiliation was deeply satisfying. It was about justice, protection, and ensuring that people who prey on others' generosity face appropriate consequences for their criminal behavior. Most importantly, I learned that wealth without wisdom is meaningless, and that the ability to test people's character before trusting them with important information or resources is one of the most valuable skills anyone can develop. Jessica and Michael taught me lessons about human nature that no amount of money could have purchased. Have you ever discovered that people you trusted were manipulating your generosity for their own benefit? How did you handle situations where family members or romantic partners tried to exploit your resources while pretending to care about your well-being? What strategies do you use to test people's character before trusting them with important information about your life or finances? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else recognize warning signs of financial manipulation or find the courage to protect themselves from exploitation before it becomes devastating. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to hear more real stories about family betrayal, relationship fraud, and protecting yourself from people who view kindness as weakness. Remember to share this with someone who might need to hear that it is possible to turn betrayal into justice while protecting yourself from people who would steal your money and destroy your trust for their own selfish purposes. Thank you for listening. And remember that you are stronger and more capable than anyone who tries to manipulate or exploit you could ever understand or anticipate. But there is one more part of this story that I think you need to hear, because it shows how completely Jessica and Michael had underestimated the woman they chose to betray. 3 months after our dramatic dinner confrontation, when they were both struggling to make their restitution payments and dealing with the social consequences of their exposure, I received a phone call that would give me one final opportunity to demonstrate exactly who they had been dealing with. The call came from Jessica, who was crying and begging me to reconsider the terms of her repayment agreement. She claimed that the financial pressure was destroying her life, that she could not find decent employment because of her damaged reputation, and that our parents were disappointed in both of us for allowing our family conflict to become so public and vindictive. "Amanda, please," Jessica said through her tears. "I know what I did was wrong, but I never meant for things to get this complicated. Michael convinced me that you would never find out, and that the money would not really hurt your finances. I was stupid and selfish, but I do not deserve to have my entire future destroyed over this mistake." I listened to Jessica's apologies and excuses with the same calm detachment I had maintained throughout our entire confrontation process. When she finished speaking, I decided to share one final revelation that would help her understand exactly what kind of mistake she had actually made. "Jessica," I said quietly, "do you remember our great aunt Eleanor? The woman who lived in Portland and never seemed to have very much money. She died when you were 22, and you complained because she left everything to me instead of splitting it between us." I remember Jessica said, sounding confused about why I was bringing up ancient family history during a conversation. "About her current financial problems? You've got her house and some savings, right? Maybe $50,000 total?" I was upset because I thought she should have treated both of her great nieces equally, actually. "Jessica, Eleanor left me $5.7 million in assets, including investment accounts, rental properties, and a successful business. I have been worth over $5.5 million for the past 9 years, earning approximately $200,000 per year in passive income while pretending to struggle on my accounting salary." The phone went completely silent for nearly 30 seconds. When Jessica finally found her voice, it was barely a whisper. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that every loan you asked for, every financial emergency you created, every dollar you stole to fund your affair with my husband, came from someone who could have given you 10 times that amount without affecting my budget in any meaningful way. You spent months manipulating someone you thought was financially limited, when actually you were dealing with someone who was testing your character and documenting your every move." Jessica began crying harder as the full implications of what I was telling her sank in. "You mean you could have helped me all along? You let me struggle and make mistakes when you had millions of dollars sitting in the bank." "No, Jessica. You chose to steal from me instead of asking for legitimate help. You chose to seduce my husband instead of working on your own problems. You chose to lie and manipulate instead of being honest about your needs. I could have helped you at any time, but you never gave me the chance to help you honestly." "But why?" Jessica asked desperately. "Why would you pretend to have less money? Why would you test us instead of just being generous with your family?" "Because I needed to know who you really were before I trusted you with knowledge about my financial situation. And now I know exactly who you are, Jessica. You are someone who steals from family members, lies without remorse, and seduces other women's husbands for personal gain. That knowledge is worth far more than the $40,000 you cost me." When I hung up from that conversation, I felt a sense of completion that had been missing since our dinner confrontation. Jessica now understood not just that she had been caught and punished, but that she had catastrophically underestimated the person she had chosen to betray. The money she had fought so hard to steal represented less than 1% of my actual net worth. But the more important lesson was about character and consequences. Jessica had assumed that someone with limited resources would be easy to manipulate and unlikely to fight back effectively when betrayed. She had been wrong on every count, and her mistake had cost her much more than money. It had cost her family relationships, social standing, and any possibility of receiving genuine help when she actually needed it. 6 months after that final phone call, I received a wedding invitation that provided perfect closure to this entire experience. David and I were getting married in a small ceremony attended by people who had proven their trustworthiness through consistent actions rather than empty promises. The contrast between this celebration and my first wedding could not have been more satisfying. At our wedding reception, my father gave a toast that acknowledged how much I had taught our family about the importance of honesty, integrity, and careful judgment in relationships. He admitted that he and my mother had been wrong to enable Jessica's manipulative behavior for so many years, and that my willingness to hold people accountable had ultimately benefited everyone. Even more satisfying was a conversation I had with David's business partner, who mentioned that he had recently been contacted by someone asking about David's financial situation and whether he might be interested in investment opportunities. This someone turned out to be Michael, who was apparently trying to identify new targets for the same kind of manipulation he had attempted with me. David's partner had immediately recognized the approach as a potential scam and had warned David about Michael's inquiries. When David told me about this conversation, I realized that Michael had learned nothing from his experience with me and was already trying to find another financially successful woman to exploit. I called the police and provided them with information about Michael's pattern of targeting women for financial manipulation, along with documentation of his previous fraud against me. The investigation that resulted led to Michael being charged with additional crimes related to his attempts to defraud other potential victims. Today, 5 years after exposing Jessica and Michael's betrayal, my life demonstrates the difference between relationships based on manipulation and those built on genuine mutual respect. David and I have been married for 4 years, and our partnership continues to be everything that my marriage to Michael pretended to be but never actually was. We have been blessed with 2 children, a daughter named Eleanor after my great-aunt and a son named Robert after my father. Raising children has given me new perspective on the importance of teaching values like honesty, accountability, and respect for others, trust, and generosity. My relationship with my parents has improved dramatically since Jessica's exposure, partly because they finally understood the difference between enabling destructive behavior and providing genuine support. They have become loving grandparents who demonstrate through their actions that family loyalty does not require accepting manipulation or betrayal. Jessica remains estranged from our family, living in Seattle and working at jobs that do not require background checks or references from previous employers. She has made no further attempts to contact me or our parents, apparently understanding that her actions destroyed any possibility of reconciliation or future assistance. Michael completed his criminal sentence and moved to another state, where his attempts to start new relationships continue to be complicated by his documented history of fraud and manipulation. His experience with me apparently taught him to be more careful about target selection, but not to abandon his exploitative approach to relationships entirely. The Richardson Foundation for Character Education, which I established using a portion of my inheritance, now provides scholarships and educational programs that teach young people about financial responsibility, relationship integrity, and the importance of earning trust through consistent actions rather than empty promises. The Foundation's work has been deeply rewarding, allowing me to transform my experience with betrayal into positive change that helps other people avoid similar exploitation. Every scholarship we award and every educational program we sponsor represents a victory over the predators who view relationships as opportunities for manipulation and theft. Looking back on the entire experience, From Jessica's first fraudulent loan request to Michael's recent arrest for attempting to defraud other women, I am grateful for the lessons I learned about human nature, relationship dynamics, and the importance of maintaining appropriate boundaries with people who have not earned complete trust. The money that Jessica and Michael stole was recovered with interest. But the more valuable outcome was learning to distinguish between people who deserve access to my resources and trust, and those who view my success as an opportunity for their own benefit rather than something to celebrate and support. Most importantly, I learned that testing people's character before trusting them with important information or resources is not manipulative or unfair. It is essential for protecting yourself from exploitation while identifying the relationships that deserve your investment and commitment. Jessica and Michael taught me that betrayal often reveals more about the character of the people who betray you than about your own judgment or trusting nature. Their willingness to steal from someone they believed had limited resources showed that their lack of integrity was not circumstantial but fundamental to who they were as people. The systematic way I documented their deception and planned their exposure was not about revenge. Though their consequences were deeply satisfying, it was about justice, protection, and ensuring that people who prey on others' generosity understand that their actions have serious and permanent consequences. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to take advantage of your trust or generosity? How did you protect yourself when you realized that family members or romantic partners were exploiting your kindness for their own benefit? What methods do you use to evaluate people's character before allowing them access to important aspects of your life? Your experiences might help other viewers recognize warning signs or find the strength to establish appropriate boundaries with people who have not earned their trust. Thank you for watching this story about family betrayal, financial manipulation, and the importance of understanding people's true motivations before placing your faith in their promises or commitments. Remember that you deserve relationships based on honesty, respect, and mutual support rather than exploitation and manipulation. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, document suspicious behavior, and never hesitate to protect yourself from people who view your success or generosity as weakness they can exploit for their own benefit. Job to job every 6 to 12 months, usually claiming that her supervisors were unfair, her coworkers were jealous, or the work environment was toxic. Throughout our entire lives, Jessica has had a gift for creating crises that require family intervention, usually in the form of financial assistance that never seems to result in lasting improvements to her situation. The pattern had been consistent since we were teenagers. Jessica would create some emergency. Our parents would rescue her. And within months, she would be facing a new crisis that somehow seemed worse than the previous one. When our parents, Robert and Linda Morrison, divorced 8 years ago, the responsibility for rescuing Jessica gradually shifted to me. Since I was the only family member with both stable income and the emotional inability to say no to her tearful requests for help. Michael and I had been married for 6 years, and for the first 3 years our relationship seemed solid and partnership-oriented. We bought a modest 3-bedroom house in a decent neighborhood, split household expenses fairly, and maintained separate checking accounts while contributing equally to a joint savings account for vacations and major purchases. Michael was charming, sociable, and seemed to genuinely enjoy my company and our shared activities. But gradually, I began to notice changes in Michael's behavior and our relationship dynamic that made me increasingly uncomfortable and suspicious. He started working later hours more frequently, claiming that the car business required more evening and weekend availability than his previous positions. He became more critical of my appearance, my cooking, and my social skills, often making comments that seemed designed to undermine my confidence rather than provide helpful feedback. More concerning was Michael's growing interest in my financial situation and my family relationships. He would ask detailed questions about my salary, my savings account balance, and my inheritance prospects from my grandparents. When Jessica would call asking for money, Michael would often encourage me to be more generous, suggesting that family loyalty was more important than strict financial planning. At first, I interpreted Michael's encouragement as evidence of his kind heart and his understanding of family obligations. But over time, I began to notice that his advice about Jessica always involved me giving her more money, never suggesting that she should take more responsibility for her own problems or seek professional help for her chronic employment issues. Jessica's financial crises had been escalating in both frequency and severity over the past 2 years. She had moved to Spokane from Seattle 18 months earlier, claiming that she needed a fresh start and wanted to be closer to family for emotional support. She found a small apartment across town and a job as a receptionist at a dental office, which seemed promising for the first few months, but within 6 months, Jessica was calling me regularly about various financial emergencies. Her car needed expensive repairs, her apartment rent had been increased beyond her budget, or she had unexpected medical expenses that her limited health insurance did not cover. Each crisis seemed urgent and temporary, with Jessica promising that she just needed a small loan to get through a difficult period. Over the course of a year, I had loaned Jessica approximately $15,000 in amounts ranging from $300 to $2,000 per incident. Jessica had made token payments toward these loans occasionally, but the total amount she owed me continued to grow rather than decrease. When I would bring up the subject of repayment, Jessica would become emotional and defensive, claiming that she was doing her best under difficult circumstances. Michael, consistently supportive of my financial assistance to Jessica, often suggesting that I should be even more generous given my stable income and Jessica's obvious struggles. He would point out that family was more important than money, and that I could afford to help Jessica more than I was already doing. His encouragement made me feel guilty about any reluctance I had to continue lending money to someone who showed no signs of improving her financial management skills. The first major warning sign came last Christmas, when Jessica showed up to our family dinner wearing expensive new clothes and jewelry that seemed inconsistent with her claimed financial difficulties. When I complimented her outfit, Jessica explained that she had saved up for months to buy herself something nice for the holidays, and that she deserved to treat herself after working so hard to get her life back on track. But later that evening, I noticed Jessica and Michael having what appeared to be an intense private conversation in our kitchen. While I was cleaning up from dinner, when I joined them, they quickly changed the subject and began making small talk about Jessica's job and her plans for the new year. Something about their behavior seemed secretive and coordinated, in a way that made me uncomfortable. Over the following weeks, I began paying closer attention to Jessica and Michael's interactions during family gatherings and social events. They seemed to communicate with meaningful glances and inside jokes that excluded me from their conversations. When Jessica would tell stories about her work or her dating life, Michael would show more interest and engagement than he typically displayed toward my family members. That breakthrough in my understanding came 3 months ago, when I accidentally discovered text messages between Michael and Jessica that revealed the true nature of their relationship and their plans for my money. I had borrowed Michael's phone to call for pizza delivery while mine was charging, and when a text notification appeared from Jessica, I opened it without thinking. The message read, "Can you talk to her about another loan this week? I need $800 for the apartment deposit by Friday, and she is getting suspicious about how often I ask for money." I scrolled through their previous conversations and found months of coordination between Jessica and Michael regarding the best timing and approaches for requesting money from me. They discussed my work schedule, my mood patterns, and the most effective emotional appeals to ensure that I would agree to provide financial assistance without asking too many questions. Even more shocking was their discussion of a romantic relationship that had apparently been developing alongside their financial conspiracy. Michael wrote about looking forward to their private time when I was working late, and Jessica responded with details about her feelings for him and her excitement about their future together. The text conversations revealed that Jessica's supposed financial emergencies were often fabricated or exaggerated to create opportunities for requesting money that she was actually spending on clothes, entertainment, and gifts for Michael. Her apartment deposit story was false. She had actually been planning to use the money for a weekend getaway with Michael to a resort in Coeur d'Alene. Reading these messages, I felt a strange combination of betrayal, anger, and something that surprised me, relief, for months. I had been questioning my own perceptions and wondering if I was being paranoid about changes in Michael's behavior and Jessica's increasingly frequent financial requests. Now I had concrete evidence that my instincts had been correct, but instead of confronting them immediately or taking steps to end both relationships, I made a decision that would change everything. I would give them exactly what they seemed to want: more money and more opportunities to reveal their true characters, while secretly documenting their betrayal and preparing for the most satisfying revenge either of them could imagine. The plan I developed was simple but effective. I would continue lending Jessica money and supporting Michael's encouragement of my generosity, while secretly tracking how the money was actually being spent and building evidence of their deception. Every dollar I gave them would become proof of their manipulation and betrayal. I also began paying much closer attention to their behavior, their schedules, and their explanations for various activities and expenses. Without being obvious about my surveillance, I started noticing patterns and inconsistencies that confirmed my suspicions about their romantic relationship and their coordinated efforts to exploit my financial resources. The first test came when Jessica called asking for $1,200 to pay for car repairs that she claimed were necessary to keep her job. She explained that her transmission was failing and that she could not afford to have it fixed without my help. She promised to repay the money within 3 months once she received an expected bonus from her dental office job. Instead of questioning her story or suggesting alternative solutions, I agreed to provide the money immediately. But I also began watching to see what Jessica actually did with the $1,200 and whether her car showed any signs of recent mechanical work. Within a week, it became clear that Jessica's transmission story was completely false. Her car appeared to be running normally, and she had not visited any auto repair shops or mechanics. Instead, Jessica had used the money to pay for expensive dinners with Michael, new clothes that she wore to work, and a weekend trip to Seattle that she claimed was for job interviews but was actually a romantic getaway. The evidence was easy to gather because Jessica posted photos from her activities on social media, apparently forgetting that I could see her posts and compare them with her explanations for how she was spending her time and money. The restaurant receipts I glimpsed in her purse showed charges that matched the dates of her supposed car repair appointments. But the most damaging evidence came from Michael's behavior during this same period. He claimed to be working overtime and attending evening training sessions that prevented him from spending time with me. But his explanations did not match the schedule posted at his dealership. When I called his work to leave a message, his colleagues would often say that Michael had left early or was not expected in that day. The second test came 6 weeks later when Jessica asked for $2,000 to cover what she described as unexpected medical expenses related to a minor surgical procedure. She explained that her health insurance had higher deductibles than she realized, and that she needed help covering the costs while she worked out payment arrangements with her doctor's office. Again, I provided the money without questioning her story or asking to see medical bills or insurance paperwork. But I also began monitoring Jessica's activities more carefully to see if her behavior was consistent with someone recovering from surgery or dealing with medical issues. Jessica's supposed medical emergency was as fictional as her transmission problems had been. Instead of recuperating or dealing with medical appointments, Jessica spent the $2,000 on a shopping spree that included expensive shoes, designer handbags, and jewelry that she wore to social events with Michael. The pattern was becoming clear. Jessica would create urgent financial needs that tugged at my emotions and family loyalty, Michael would encourage my generosity and discourage my skepticism. And then they would use my money to fund their romantic relationship while planning their eventual escape from their obligations. To me, but I was not ready to confront them yet. I wanted to see exactly how far they would go with their deception. And I wanted to gather enough evidence to ensure that their betrayal would have serious consequences for both of them. I also wanted to understand the full scope of their plans for my money and our relationships. The third test was the most revealing. Jessica called asking for $5,000 to pay for what she described as a business opportunity that would allow her to start her own dental office management consulting company. She claimed that a former supervisor had offered to help her establish the business, but that she needed startup capital to pay for licensing, equipment, and marketing materials. This request was different from Jessica's previous financial emergencies because it involved a larger amount of money and a more elaborate story about her career, plans, and business prospects. Jessica had clearly put effort into researching the consulting industry and developing a convincing explanation for why this opportunity was both legitimate and time sensitive. Michael was particularly enthusiastic about this business loan, claiming that it represented exactly the kind of investment that could transform Jessica's financial situation and make her independent rather than constantly needing family assistance. He encouraged me to view the $5,000 as an investment in Jessica's future, rather than simply another loan that might not be repaid. But when I asked Jessica for details about her business plan, her target market, and her timeline for profitability, her answers were vague and inconsistent. She could not explain how dental office management consulting actually worked, who her potential clients would be, or what services she would provide that other companies did not already offer. More tellingly, Jessica could not provide contact information for the former supervisor who had supposedly offered to help her start the business, claiming that this person preferred to remain anonymous until the business was officially established. When I suggested meeting with this mentor to discuss the opportunity, Jessica became defensive and claimed that my interference might jeopardize the entire arrangement. Despite these red flags, I agreed to provide the $5,000 business loan. But I also began tracking Jessica's activities much more carefully to see how she actually used the money and whether she made any genuine efforts. Start a consulting company within 2 weeks. It was obvious that Jessica's business opportunity was as fictional as her previous emergencies had been. Instead of researching the consulting industry or developing business plans, Jessica had used the money to pay for an expensive vacation with Michael to Las Vegas, where they stayed at luxury hotels and ate at high-end restaurants while I assumed Jessica was working on her business. Startup. The Las Vegas trip was particularly revealing because Jessica had told me she would be attending business training seminars and networking events, while Michael had claimed he would be attending a car dealership conference. The reality was that they were spending my money on a romantic getaway while lying to me about their individual plans and their relationship with each other. But the most damaging discovery came when I found evidence that Jessica and Michael had been discussing their long-term plans for my money and our relationships. Through careful observation and some well-timed questions, I learned that they were calculating how much money they could reasonably extract from me before I became suspicious or stopped providing assistance. They had discussed strategies for maintaining my trust while maximizing their financial benefit, including having Michael file for divorce once they had accumulated enough money to start their new life together. Their plan was to use my generosity to fund their relationship while positioning themselves to leave me with nothing but debt and betrayal. The fourth and final test came 2 months ago, when Jessica asked for $7,000 to pay for what she described as an opportunity to buy into a successful dental practice as a junior partner. She claimed that her current employer was expanding and offering management positions to qualified employees, but that she needed to contribute to the partnership investment to secure her position. This request represented the largest amount Jessica had ever asked for, and it came with an elaborate story about career advancement and professional opportunities that would Finally, provide her with financial stability and independence. Jessica presented documents that appeared to be partnership agreements and financial projections, though I suspected they were fabricated or misleading. Michael was extremely supportive of this investment opportunity, arguing that $7,000 was a small price to pay for Jessica's chance at professional success and financial security. He suggested that I should view this as the final assistance Jessica would need, since her partnership in the dental practice would provide sufficient income to repay all her previous loans and support herself independently. But when I investigated Jessica's claims about the dental practice expansion and partnership opportunities, I discovered that none of her story was true. Her employer had no plans for expansion or new partnerships, and they had not offered management positions to any current employees. Jessica's supposed partnership documents were completely fabricated at this point. I had provided Jessica with over $25,000 based on false emergencies and fictional opportunities, while Michael had consistently encouraged my generosity and discouraged my skepticism. They had used my money to fund their romantic relationship, their vacations, and their luxury purchases while planning to abandon me once they had extracted sufficient resources. But they had also given me comprehensive evidence of their deception, manipulation, and betrayal. Every loan I had provided was documented. Every false story was recorded. And every lie was provable through bank records, receipts, and their own social media posts. They had essentially built the case against themselves while believing they were successfully manipulating me now. I was ready to confront them and implement the revenge I had been planning for months. But I wanted their exposure to be as public and humiliating as possible. While ensuring that they would face serious consequences for their betrayal and theft, I arranged a family dinner at our house on a Sunday afternoon in October, inviting not just Jessica and Michael, but also our parents, Michael's parents, and several close family friends who had witnessed Jessica's supposed financial struggles and my generous assistance over the years. I told everyone that I wanted to celebrate Jessica's new business success and Michael's recent promotion at the dealership. Jessica arrived wearing expensive new clothes and jewelry that she had purchased with money from her latest loan, apparently confident that her deception had been successful and that she was about to be celebrated for her supposed professional achievements. Michael was equally relaxed and charming, playing the role of the supportive brother-in-law who had encouraged my generosity toward Jessica, as we enjoyed appetizers and drinks. Jessica and Michael entertained our guests with stories about Jessica's business consulting work and Michael's success in car sales. Their performance was polished and convincing, suggesting that they had practiced these deceptions extensively and were comfortable lying to family members and friends when dinner was served and everyone was seated comfortably around our dining room table. I stood up and asked for everyone's attention. I explained that I had some important announcements to make about our family's recent activities and future plans, and that I wanted to share this information with the people who cared most about Jessica and Michael. I began by thanking everyone for their support of Jessica during her difficult period of unemployment and financial instability, and for their understanding of my decision to provide financial assistance to help her rebuild her career and personal life. I explained that their encouragement had made it easier for me to be generous with Jessica, even when the amounts became substantial. Then I pulled out a folder containing bank statements, receipts, text message printouts, and photographs that told the complete story of Jessica and Michael's betrayal. As I began reading selected excerpts aloud, the dinner conversation around the table gradually stopped as our guests realized that something unexpected was happening. I read the text. Messages between Jessica and Michael, discussing their coordination of loan requests and their romantic relationship. I displayed receipts from restaurants, hotels, and shopping trips that showed how Jessica had actually spent money she claimed to need for emergencies and business opportunities. I shared photographs from their Las Vegas vacation that contradicted their explanations about attending separate business conferences. The reaction from our dinner guests was immediate and devastating. My parents sat in stunned silence as they realized the extent of Jessica's lies and manipulation. Michael's parents looked mortified as they understood that their son had been conducting an affair while married to me. Our friends appeared shocked and uncomfortable, as they recognized that they had been deceived along with me. But the most satisfying moment came when I presented evidence of Jessica and Michael's long-term plans to continue, exploiting my generosity while building their romantic relationship behind my back. The text messages about calculating how much money they could extract from me, their discussions about Michael filing for divorce, and their plans to start a new life together using my financial support revealed the true scope of their betrayal. As I finished my presentation, the dining room was completely silent except for the sound of Jessica crying and Michael's attempts to deny and minimize their actions. The contrast between their confident arrival and their current humiliation could not have been more satisfying or complete. I concluded my remarks by explaining that both Jessica and Michael would be receiving formal demand letters for repayment of all money obtained through false pretenses, and that our family relationships were permanently severed effective immediately. I also announced that divorce proceedings had already been filed, and that Jessica was no longer welcome in our family's home or financial support. The dinner ended with most of our guests leaving quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the dramatic revelations and unwilling to be associated with Jessica and Michael's deceptive behavior. Jessica and Michael remained at the table, apparently too shocked and humiliated to move, while I began clearing dishes and preparing to end this chapter of my life permanently. Outside our house, Jessica made one final attempt to manipulate the situation. "Amanda," she said through her tears, "I never meant for things to go this far. Michael and I just developed feelings for each other, and we were trying to find a way to handle the situation without hurting you. We can work this out as family and figure out how to move forward together. You stole $25,000 from me," I replied calmly. "You lied about emergencies and business opportunities to manipulate my emotions and extract money for your affair. You used my generosity to fund your relationship while planning to abandon me once you had enough money. This is not a family situation, Jessica. This is theft and fraud." Michael stepped forward, apparently hoping to salvage something from the disaster. "Amanda," he said, "relationships are complicated and people make mistakes. Jessica and I never intended to hurt you financially or emotionally. We can repay the money and work out our personal issues through counseling or mediation. You coordinated your deception for months," I told him. "You encouraged me to give Jessica more money while knowing she was lying about how it would be used. You planned to divorce me once you had extracted sufficient resources to start your new life together. This was not a mistake, Michael. This was a conspiracy." The next morning, Jessica and Michael both received certified letters from my attorney demanding full repayment of all loans within 30 days, plus interest and penalties for fraud. The letters also informed them that failure to comply would result in civil lawsuits and possible criminal charges for theft and conspiracy. Michael moved out of our house that week, taking only his personal belongings and leaving behind anything we had purchased together during our marriage. He initially threatened to contest the divorce and claim half of our joint assets, but his attorney apparently advised him that his documented deception and affair eliminated any possibility of receiving favorable settlement terms. Jessica attempted to negotiate reduced repayment terms, claiming that she could not afford to repay the full amount immediately and requesting a payment plan that would extend over several years. I rejected all such proposals, explaining that her fraud had forfeited any consideration for flexible or reduced obligations. The divorce proceedings were completed within 4 months, with Michael receiving no portion of our joint assets and accepting full responsibility for his own debts and obligations. The settlement agreement included provisions that prohibited him from contacting me or attempting to claim any future interest in property we had acquired during our marriage. Jessica's repayment proved more difficult to enforce, since her income was limited and her employment history was unstable. However, the legal pressure and social embarrassment from her exposure motivated her to find steadier work and begin making regular payments toward her debt. She also received assistance from our parents, who were so mortified by her behavior that they provided money to help expedite her repayment. 6 months after exposing their betrayal, both Jessica and Michael had repaid the majority of the money they had stolen, though the interest and penalties meant they would be making payments for another 2 years. More importantly, their reputations in our community and their prospects for future relationships had been permanently damaged. By the public exposure of their deception, Jessica moved back to Seattle, claiming that she needed a fresh start away from the embarrassment and social consequences of her actions in Spokane. She found employment as a receptionist at a different dental office, though her references from her previous job were apparently not positive enough to help her advance to higher paying positions. Michael continued working at the car dealership, but his colleagues and supervisors had learned about his fair and financial deception through the social media posts and community gossip that followed our dramatic dinner confrontation. His professional reputation was damaged, and his prospects for advancement or moving to better positions were limited by the public knowledge of his character issues. The most satisfying consequence of their betrayal was that their romantic relationship had not survived the stress and embarrassment of being exposed. Within 3 months of our divorce being finalized, Jessica and Michael were no longer speaking to each other, each blaming the other for the failure of their scheme and the legal and financial consequences they both faced. Jessica called me on my birthday, 8 months after our confrontation, to apologize and ask if there was any possibility of rebuilding our family relationship. She claimed that she had learned from her mistakes and understood the damage she had caused to our family trust and my marriage. She wanted to know if I would consider forgiveness and reconciliation. I told Jessica that our family's relationship was permanently over, and that her apologies were meaningless given the systematic and deliberate nature of her betrayal. I explained that trust, once broken through such calculated deception, could never be restored, and that her actions had revealed her true character in ways that could not be undone through regret or promises of change. Michael made no attempt to contact me directly after our divorce was finalized, though I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had attempted to start new relationships with other women. However, his documented history of deception and financial manipulation apparently made it difficult for him to find partners who were willing to trust him with access to their resources or emotions. 1 year after exposing their betrayal, I had completely rebuilt my life around relationships based on honesty, respect, and mutual support. I was dating someone new, a widowed accountant named David, who understood the importance of trust and financial responsibility in relationships. Our courtship was slow and careful. It's built on gradual disclosure and proven reliability rather than dramatic romance or expensive gestures. David knew about my experience with Michael and Jessica's betrayal, and his response was supportive rather than judgmental. He understood that my caution about financial matters and relationship commitments was the result of hard-earned wisdom rather than paranoia or inability to trust. Our relationship developed at a pace that allowed both of us to demonstrate our character and intentions through consistent actions over time. I also reconnected with friends and extended family members who had been gradually excluded from my life during my marriage to Michael. I realized that Michael had systematically discouraged my relationships with people who might have questioned his behavior or provided alternative perspectives on our marriage dynamics. My parents' relationship with me improved significantly after Jessica's betrayal was exposed, partly because they could no longer deny or minimize the damage her behavior had caused to our family. For the first time in years, my parents treated me as the responsible, reliable daughter rather than the one who needed to take care of Jessica's problems. Perhaps most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts about people's motivations and character, rather than dismissing suspicious behavior or making excuses for people who did not deserve my loyalty or generosity. The experience taught me that love and family connections do not require accepting manipulation or betrayal, and that protecting myself from exploitation is not selfish but necessary. The money that Jessica and Michael stole was eventually repaid with interest. But the more important victory was learning to build relationships based on honesty and mutual respect, rather than obligation and guilt. Their betrayal taught me valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation and responding appropriately to people who view relationships as opportunities for exploitation. Today, 2 years after exposing their conspiracy, I am engaged to David and planning a wedding that will celebrate genuine partnership rather than performance and deception. Our financial planning is completely transparent. Our communication is honest and direct. And our commitment is based on proven compatibility rather than romantic fantasy or social expectations. The experience with Jessica and Michael was painful and expensive, but it ultimately led to personal growth and better relationships that have made my life richer and more satisfying than it was. During the years when I was being systematically deceived and exploited, their betrayal forced me to develop stronger boundaries and better judgment that have protected me from similar manipulation. Looking back, I realized that Jessica and Michael's betrayal was actually a gift that saved me from years of continued deception and financial exploitation. If I had not discovered their conspiracy when I did, they might have succeeded in extracting much more money while causing even greater damage to my financial security and emotional well-being. The systematic way I documented their deception and planned their exposure was not about revenge as much as it was about justice and protection. By giving them opportunities to reveal their true character while building evidence of their crimes, I ensured that they would face appropriate consequences while protecting myself from further exploitation. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was using your generosity to betray you? How did you handle the situation when family members or romantic partners tried to exploit your love and financial resources for their own benefit? What warning signs should people watch for when they suspect financial manipulation in their relationships? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might help someone else recognize dangerous patterns or find the courage to protect themselves before betrayal becomes financially or emotionally devastating. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to hear more real stories about surviving family betrayal and building healthier relationships. Remember to share this with someone who might need to hear that. Justice is possible even when the people closest to you conspire to steal your money and destroy your trust for their own selfish purposes. Thank you for listening, and remember that you are stronger and smarter than anyone who tries to manipulate or exploit you could ever understand or anticipate.